Today was day 5 of Derek Chauvin's trial, and we have a 7th juror who was added to the list. And so we're going to break down, as we have been doing on this channel, the demographics of the different jurors. We also are learning a little bit more about the jurors' ages, and so we added a column on our demographics chart. And so let's go into the story today. This is over from thestartribune.com. It says, day ends with the 7th juror added to the Derek Chauvin murder trial. Potential jurors in the Chauvin murder trial were assembled for a 4th day this week, and one found out Friday afternoon that she will join 6 others already chosen to weigh charges in connection with the death of George Floyd. The court adjourned for the day on Friday. The jury so far, and this is where we get some of the ages, includes one multiracial woman in her 20s. We have one black man in his 30s. We have one Hispanic man in his 20s, a white woman in her 50s, and 3 white men, 2 of whom are in their 30s and another one in their 20s. And so we're sort of assembling our little jury panel here, as we can see. And if you're on Clubhouse, you can follow along. Just go to rrlaw.tv and you can see the slides. So we have a total of 14 seats that are going to need to be filled up. 2 of those are going to be dismissed, but right now we're about halfway there. We've got 7 people, and these are the emojis that you can see representing each of our different jurors. This is the demographics chart that we've been building. As we can see down here, juror number 7 looks like it is a white woman in her 50s. She is a healthcare nonprofit individual, so she's sort of an executive at a nonprofit that services the healthcare space. She's a single mother, high-level executive, and she made a statement during her line of questioning today where she basically was saying that not all cops are bad and that she had a lot of empathy for both sides of what happened here. In other words, this was a tragedy all around, which is something that we've been saying here on this channel. So she joins now other jurors. We can see she is the 2nd female who is on the panel. Number 2 is another female. She's in her 20s and she's a person of color. The rest of them are males. And so we've got 3 white males. We've got a total of 3 people of color. We've got 1 Hispanic, 1 black, 1 person of color, and then we've got a total of 4 white people. And so I know it's so uncomfortable to talk about this racial stuff and sort of categorize people, but this is exactly what the jurors are doing. This is what the court is doing. Everybody's looking at the demographics here because this is a trial that is largely centered around race. And so I'm just showing you what is really going on behind the scenes. This is what everybody is doing sort of on both sides. They're trying to make sure that the demographics are best for their side. And so there's nothing even wrong with that, in my opinion. Prosecutor is going to want basically a bunch of non-white people on the jury. The defense is going to want a bunch of white people on the jury. And that's just the reality. I know it's uncomfortable to talk about, but that's just how these things work. So let's take a look at the chart here that we have organizing everything. We can see that not a lot of new people have been added to our panel. Prosecution really looks the same. Didn't see any new additions or subtractions today. Of course, Eric Nelson and the defense team really hasn't seen any additions or subtractions anyways. So I think we'll probably see this throughout most of the trial. I haven't seen any other documents that have been submitted on the court website showing that anybody else is trying to get on board or join the team one way or the other. So let's take a look at the jurors. So the first juror that was stricken today is a woman who was a recent college graduate. She carefully chose her words and she gave unwavering answers to probing questions. She was asked about her ability to consider only the evidence presented at trial and not just the widely viewed video. She says here, "What I saw as a human that did not give me a good impression. What I saw as a human that did not give me a good impression," said the woman who disclosed she participated in a social justice protest in Duluth in the time since Floyd died. She said, quote, "I just couldn't watch it anymore." Defense attorney Eric Nelson, and I'm going to show you a couple clips from this conversation, followed with questions about her willingness to accept information about policies that guide police procedure and whether she was willing to listen to both sides. She assured Nelson that she would on both counts if seated. After a brief huddle with his legal team, he used a strike and had the woman dismissed. So this is a young college student female. She was very kind of short with her answers, sort of yes, yes, yes. And I'm going to show you 2 clips from this line of questioning. So the first one is him sort of going through. We hear her talk about the clip that she says, "I watched the video. I actually couldn't finish it, and it left me with a negative impression." Then what happens is Eric Nelson goes through some of the rest of her questionnaire, and he's basically detailing out that this is somebody who has been largely involved with these protests, somebody who has very strong opinions about it. Then we're going to kind of skip over. There's a lot of, yes, yes, yes. He's going down and saying, So you're passionate about it. Yes. You participated in this. Yes. Yeah. So it's not really that interesting. But then we are going to get to the final part of his questioning where he's kind of asking her, okay, now in light of all of this, in light of everything you posted, in light of everything you've just said here, in light of the fact that you have legitimate opinions that this was a troubling scene, can you still be fair and impartial? And she says, well, we'll get there in a minute. So here is Eric Nelson from his first clip when he's interviewing this young lady.
In terms of your opinion as to Mr. Chauvin, you indicated that it was a somewhat negative response.
Yes.
Okay. And you wrote, the only reason I chose this and not neutral is due to the fact that it went on so long, the knee, in parentheticals. So can you just explain why did that influence your opinion to the more negative of Mr. Chauvin?
I could only watch part of the video, and from what I saw as a human, that did not give me a good impression.
Okay.
Right, and that's fair. And I don't think anybody who watched the video had a good impression of it at all. And so he goes through and he's really hammering that home. And as I go through these explanations, I'm not making a judgment call on one or the other, but this is the defense attorney interviewing somebody about whether they're going to be fair and impartial to Derek Chauvin. So she's out there now saying, yes, I watched the video, I couldn't even finish it, and it left me with a negative impression. So as I mentioned, then this defense attorney, Eric Nelson, goes through sort of a long history about social media posts and other things. Then we get to this next clip where he's really trying to dial in on this and say, all right, listen, you've got all of these opinions. I know that. That's okay. Can you be fair and impartial? And then we hear what she says. And you just have to ask yourself, as somebody who is sort of listening through this, and just listen to this last clip where she said, it was a negative impression, I couldn't even finish the video. Then we're going to go through and you're going to hear Eric Nelson's sort of a list of everything else that she was involved in. And then, well, you can decide. Here is that second clip.
What do you mean by the need for possible police reform?
Just that.
Just that it could be or may not be?
We need police reform.
Right. I mean, are you open to the possibility that police reform is not needed?
No.
So you do believe that there are some reforms that are needed to be made as a result of this incident?
Yes.
Again, and it's perfectly okay. I'm not, you indicated that you had, in fact, yourself participated in a peaceful BLM protest in Duluth, and you did not carry a sign?
Yes.
And that other people like your cousins, I believe, indicated that they had also participated in some marches?
They were in Minneapolis, yes.
Minneapolis, okay. Why did you decide to go to that protest?
I just felt it was necessary to show my support.
Okay. Your support for whom?
Others who have been affected by similar situations.
Okay. So not simply this particular case.
And this case.
And this case. So again, you have an opinion about this case. You have an opinion about Mr. Chauvin. You have an opinion about the need for police reform. And all of those opinions are you are entitled to those opinions. Can you honestly tell us that you can set aside those strong opinions and judge this case on the facts alone?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So then he goes and huddles with Chauvin and his assistant. They come back and they issue a peremptory strike. Right? I don't have any issues with anybody having their own opinions, but if you have opinions that I think are so rooted that you couldn't even finish the video, that you watched and said that you already developed a negative impression about the man. Also, you went down and physically protested. I mean, that is somebody who is highly invested in the cause. We also heard her say something along the lines of, do you think police reform is necessary? And he says, well, do you think that it's possible that it may not be necessary? And she says, no, it absolutely has to be necessary. So in other words, this woman sees that there is a problem with the police, went down and marched, was pretty vocal about it. It sounds like with some other people in her community, communicating with them and going and protesting. So that's okay. There's no issues with that. I've got no problems with that. But should she be a juror? Of course not. Of course not. And so when she says, yes, I can be fair and impartial, I mean, that's just sort of, we appreciate your faith in yourself, but as a defense lawyer or as a prosecutor, when you have somebody that is that obviously biased one way or the other, they've got to go. So I think that was a very good peremptory strike. And so that was one strike from the defense about somebody who was pro BLM, supported a march, somebody who was anti-police. And the prosecutor today also used a peremptory strike on somebody who was the opposite of that, right? Exactly what we expect. So both sides are using peremptories appropriately. We have another one. This individual was stricken from the jury. The prosecution, according to the Star Tribune, exercised one of its strikes and dismissed a prospective juror who served in the Army Reserve for 8 years and was deployed to Iraq. He was questioned extensively about whether he could give equal weight to testimony of police officers versus bystanders at the scene. Quote, he said, being in the military, it's easy for bystanders to say how they would react in that situation, the man said, while insisting he would not give law enforcement an edge in credibility. He said the fact that Chauvin also served in the military would not affect his opinion, which is, okay, right, that's his statement, but there's sort of a special kinship that exists in the military. We all know that. The man also attributed to witnesses some of the growing tension and stress in the atmosphere as Floyd was being restrained. He said, quote, it seemed like it escalated very quickly. He said, people yelling, people recording, all the while police are trying to retain control of the situation. And so the prosecution struck him out as well. And so another good peremptory strike. This is somebody who is, much more law and order, Army Reserve. He was somebody who was there for 8 years, deployed to Iraq, knows chain of command, knows protocols, and they booted him, as they probably should have. So again, both sides exercising peremptories appropriately. Then near, midday, we got the 7th juror who made it onto the panel. And we're going to learn a little bit more about her, and then we got a clip from her as well. So here she is. The 7th juror seated is a single mother who is a high-level executive in the nonprofit sector focused on healthcare. She took the unusual move of summoning her own attorney to the courthouse. At one point, the judge halted the live external feed, cleared the courtroom of everyone except the trial participants out of unspecified privacy concerns. She told defense attorney Nelson that she had prior professional dealings with Attorney General Keith Ellison's office. They're running the prosecution in this case, but didn't know him personally. She later told prosecuting attorney Steve Schleicher that, quote, all of our interactions with Ellison were positive at the time and would have no impact on her ability to be a fair juror. The woman said the bystander video left her with somewhat negative view of Chauvin, explaining that, quote, a man died and I'm not sure that's procedure. Not all police are bad, but the bad behavior police need to go, which is very reasonable, I think. At the same time, she acknowledged sympathy for Floyd and the officers at the scene that night, saying, quote, everyone's lives are changed by this incident, and it's not easy for anyone. She was followed by the next prospective juror, a young woman who was quickly excused, saying that she got a new job and she was attempting to move. So some jurors are just being sort of booted out just because of practical concerns. I've got a job, I'm attempting to move. We saw, I think one of the jurors who was seated actually had a wedding coming up in May, but he's going through this anyways. He got a little bit of a motion to continue granted on that wedding, which is, it might be a good thing for him. So let's take a look at juror number 7 and his or her conversation here with attorney Eric Nelson. Here it is.
What you wrote in terms of the opinions you expressed to your friends and family, at least, was that you had sympathy for Mr. Floyd as well as the officers.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain that a little to me?
Everyone's lives are changed by this incident and what happened. Everyone's lives. And it's not easy for anyone. And so, yeah, I have sympathy or empathy, for everyone involved, because this is life-altering, life-changing, and it's hard.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's very reasonable. And it's sort of funny to hear how people respond to those questions. If you recall, when juror number 2 was up, I think that was on Tuesday, she came out and she's like, I'm just so excited to be here. Oh, I can't, this is going to be crazy. And, she was a college student and she knows how important it is. And so she made it onto the jury. And you sort of compare and contrast that to juror number 7, who's like, oh, gosh, this whole thing is just a mess. And so you've got people from multiple different, age groups. We have a 20 some-year-old woman. We have a 50-year-old woman. We've got men sort of scattered around the age brackets. And so we've got a lot of room ahead. We've got a long ways to go until we get a full panel. We can see here, we go back to our emoji panel. We've got number 8. So let's say we get number 8 on Monday. We have number 9 Tuesday, 10 Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Monday, Tuesday. So we could have a week and a couple days potentially, or if they're able to kind of squeeze some of these things together, if we can get 2, 2, and maybe 1, we could finish up next week. That would be 4 days. But there was another issue that we talked about yesterday where there are still motions in limine that they need to solve. And remember, motions in limine are the sort of the rules of the trial. They have to sort some of those things out. And yesterday, they discussed that today they were going to, both the defense attorney and the prosecution was going to be delivering USB drives over to the judge. And they granted the judge time over the weekend to review everything so that when they come back on Monday, the judge is up to speed with all of the things that they're going to be talking about. And one of those was a pretty critical issue that relates to the 2019 case where George Floyd also had an interaction with law enforcement. And the defense allegation here, the reason why they want to talk about that case is because they're saying his modus operandi was all about anytime he had interaction with law enforcement, he would just consume whatever drugs were on his person. So they want to bring that 2019 case into this current trial and explain that this is something that he did or he likely did because he did it historically. And so the judge obviously knows how provocative that is. It is extremely, extremely prejudicial. Is it probative enough to overcome that prejudice? Well, we don't know. And so the judge is going to get up to speed about those issues over the weekend, and then we should hear more about that on Monday morning. So Monday may not have a lot of jurors selected because of those other preliminary issues are going to be dealt with first thing. So we also know that today there was new news that there was a $27 million settlement with the George Floyd family. Massive, massive settlement. This article, again, over from Star Tribune, written by Liz Navratil and Maya Rao, says Minneapolis will pay the record $27 million to settle the lawsuit brought by the Floyd family. Largest pretrial settlement in a civil rights wrongful death case in history, said Floyd's attorneys. When George Floyd was horrifically killed on May 25th, it was a watershed moment for America, said family attorney Ben Crump this afternoon, Friday, at a news conference. Quote, he says, it's one of the most egregious and shocking documentations of an American citizen being tortured to death by a police officer, one of the worst ever witnessed in history. History will judge us for how we respond to this tragedy, for how we responded to this tragedy. Crump applauded Mayor Jacob Frey and council members for the settlement, saying Minneapolis was being watched in its darkest hour. Now the city can be a beacon of hope and light and change for cities across America and across the globe. After a roughly 40-minute private meeting Friday afternoon, city council members voted unanimously to approve the settlement. Frey's office said he will approve it as well. Of the $27,500,000 will be used for the benefit of the community around 38th in Chicago, where Floyd died, according to the city. So the rest of that money sounds like $27.5 million going back over to the Floyd family. This is a deeply traumatic event, unfortunately, is a part of too many Black and brown families' realities, said Council Vice President Andrea Jenkins after the vote. There is no amount of money that can replace a brother, a son, a nephew, a father, a loved one. But what we can do is continue to work towards justice and equity and equality in the city of Minneapolis, and that's what I commit to do. The settlement could have major implications for the city and its police department, whose fate hangs in the balance as some city leaders and community members seek to replace it. And we know that because they originally defunded the police. I think they moved $8 million out of their budget into another budget, and then a couple months later, they put back $6.3 million, so they refunded the police, and we talked about that here on this channel. So now we've got $27 million that is also coming from city funds. I don't know if they have special funds there or where that's coming from, but that's a significant chunk of money. If we recall, they defunded the police, I think it was about $8 million, and now they're sort of paying out $27 million, which is a nice chunk of change. The previous record for police payouts came in 2019 when city agreed to pay $20 million to settle the lawsuit filed by Justine Rusiek Damond. She was killed by former Minneapolis police officer Mohammed Noor after she called a report a possible assault in an alley behind her South Minneapolis home. And that's the second time we've heard about this case, the Noor case. You may remember that was all that was basically the underlying case that was the subject of Chauvin's appeal regarding the third-degree murder charge that just came back. I think that was Tuesday. Here is the motion. Here is the formal settlement agreement. We're going to hear from George Floyd's attorney, his family's attorney, in the next slide. But this is the final settlement offer that we got out of the city today. Motion: Goodman, moves to approve the settlement of all claims asserted by Karen Nelson Schaefer, plaintiff, as trustee for the next of kin of George Floyd Jr., instituted legal proceedings against the city of Minneapolis and U.S. District Court, payment of $27 million to the estate of the next of kin of George Floyd Jr. via persons or entities as determined by the court's anticipated distribution from fund/org. Of which $500,000 will be used for the benefit of the community around 38th and Chicago, and to authorize the city attorney's office to execute any documents necessary to effectuate the settlement and the dismissal. So very, very, very large settlement. And here is Ben Crump, George Floyd's family or his estate's attorney. And you'll notice, I mean, he's calling for peace right out of the gate. This clip came over from CBS on Twitter.
Can we all do that for George Floyd? Can we all do that for our children? It is my great honor to announce that
it obviously is a big settlement. Family is going to be very, very happy about it. We've got a statement over here on Twitter this was from Aaron Hesanyanda, WCCO, says, this is a statement from the Floyd family on the settlement. It says, our family is grateful for all those who care so deeply about George's life and our loss, and this agreement is a necessary step for all of us to begin to get some closure, said Rodney Floyd, brother of George Floyd. So get some closure. We'll see, because the trial is still another, 6 weeks out from getting resolved. It may be even longer than that, maybe 2 months. But I have some initial thoughts on the settlement agreement. So, a lot of people out there are saying, a lot of opinions being expressed right now. So let's break this down just a little bit. Let's look at the pros first. What might be good things that come out of the settlement? Well, number one, George Floyd's family gets compensated for this, right? They lost somebody, a brother, somebody close to them, a son. The whole family's impacted. Obviously, we want to make sure that they're taken care of and receive some compensation for their loss. That is a good thing. It could be a not good thing if you're on the other side of this conversation and you're saying, yeah, but wait a minute. He didn't die because of anything that the city did. He died because of a drug overdose. And they haven't even gone through and proven criminal culpability. There has been no proof of causation that Derek Chauvin ultimately resulted in the death of George Floyd. That's still up for debate, and you can have a reasonable disagreement about that. Right now, it's undecided because the trial has not been had yet. And the city council came out and settled the case before any liability has been proven. And so you can understand that these are two separate, I would say, burdens of proof, two different standards that we're talking about here. Criminal court is a much higher burden. It's a much higher standard. It's called beyond a reasonable doubt. And so you could say that maybe the defense can show that there's enough doubt that's based in reason as to whether or not the knee killed George Floyd, or whether it was some other substantial factor like drugs or like heart problems or like recovery from COVID. You could have that perspective on it, but that's for a criminal case. So if you can show that there is some doubt that's based in reason, well, maybe he doesn't get convicted in a criminal court because that burden of proof is so high. But in a civil claim in a civil case, think about the standard being significantly lower. So beyond a reasonable doubt, when we talk about it in terms of percentages, we kind of say it's an analogy, but kind of say like if it's 80% likely that a person committed that offense, we can find them guilty. Like 80%. It's a high threshold. But for a civil case, it's low. It's closer to like 51%. If it's more likely than not, it's a much lower standard. And so you could see where you might be able to show that George Floyd was not, you can't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt that he was killed by Chauvin for criminal court, but that maybe he was a substantial factor and it was a major contribution to his death in civil court. So you can sort of flesh out those arguments either way. Another thing, I think a pro here is that the city council is obviously responding to their constituents. Now, I don't live in Minneapolis or Minnesota. Don't really even know anybody out there. I think we have a couple people in Clubhouse, or I think one or two people who are in that area. And they were sort of detailing what the feeling was on the ground. But you have to understand that the city council, they probably have a lot of constituents who are very upset about this, and they've got to make a policy decision about how to handle this moving forward in a way that's going to cause the least amount of damage to the city. Let's say, hypothetically, that this settlement goes through and Derek Chauvin is convicted on all counts, and the city feels like the civil compensation matches the criminal conviction and everything is well and good. We're all hoping that there's no unrest, that there's no riots, that everybody's happy with that. But in the event that that does not happen, in the event that Derek Chauvin is acquitted on all counts, or he's sort of splits down the middle, maybe he's convicted on 2, not convicted on 1, or convicted on 1 and not convicted on 2, then what happens with that? Does that invalidate the settlement? What if he's acquitted on all counts? Does that invalidate the settlement? Well, no, the city already entered into this agreement. They're going to pay it regardless of his acquittal. But how does that sit with the public in terms of the public's paying for that, right? The public is compensating the family for that. And I know it feels just awful to talk about money in the context of losing somebody's life, but this is a policy consideration. And this is something that irritates me so badly when it comes to our police departments and our law enforcement agencies throughout this country. They're able to go out there, kill people and break things. And guess who pays for their negligence? We do. All the people do. Where do you think that $27 million is coming from? It's coming from the taxpayers. It's going into some coffers that the city council just kind of allows their police to do whatever they want to do. And then they pay damages for the harm that their police caused. And so maybe this is, if anything, this $27 million is just a nice little slap in the mouth for all of the policymakers in the state government, the federal government that say, hey, pull your heads out of your rears. We want actual reform. And until you pass that stuff, we're just going to keep slapping these massive fines on you, or we're going to settle these massive claims until something gets done. So we've got a lot of policy things to talk about. The big question here is this going to be enough to calm the storm, to sort of turn the volume down here? We heard from Ben Crump saying that peace, 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 please, please, please. And of course, I think that settlement makes it a lot easier for him to say that, doesn't it? Right? He just settled a $27 million claim. He's going to take a big chunk of that for his fee. And now he can come out and just say, yes, now it's peaceful. Right. All right. So let's take a look at some of the questions over from locals.com. We've got Liberty or Death in the house. Says, spring break, no class for a week, taking it easy tonight, no studying, hit it again tomorrow afternoon. You have my undivided attention. Mrs. Liberty or Death is watching too. She thinks you're funny and cute and know your stuff. Please give her a shout out. What's up, Mrs. Liberty or Death? We love having Mr. Liberty or Death on the program. Very insightful, lovely comments. I think he's going to be a powerhouse in the future. So you made a good decision. We have News Now Wyoming says, Court TV today said this summer Chauvin was offered and accepted a plea agreement for third-degree murder, but AG Barr nixed it. Yeah, we talked about that here on the channel. I was confused, so I looked at 20 articles verifying the claim, but none of them explained why AG Barr had any say on state criminal charges. Would he be able to stop a state settlement? So I don't think that AG Barr would have any ability to sort of get in there and interfere on a state settlement. I think that the original reason why that plea agreement was not sort of resolved back then is there was a possibility that there were federal civil rights charges that would be brought in a district court. And so, of course, if that is in a district court and the U.S. Attorney's Office is going to be responding to that, AG Barr did have jurisdiction over those claims. And so I think they were, as part of the settlement, the family could have filed suit in state court. They could have filed, I think, civil rights claims under federal code, and that would have extended jurisdiction up into the federal courts. And so he was just brought into the circle to discuss the possibility of a global settlement. And obviously that didn't come to fruition. This was settled, looks like, in state court. There were no federal claims that were filed. I'm going to guess that as part of this settlement, they are going to be waiving the potential of any other federal claims that they would have otherwise maybe been able to bring. So, again, and the plea agreement thing, that's a little bit of a question. That's a problematic issue here as well. The idea that Derek Chauvin would have pled guilty to a murder charge, and that's being floated around the media like he was contemplating to accept guilt on that is not good, right, for a defendant to say, well, he's sort of predisposed to pleading guilty. That sort of presumes that he thinks he is guilty and that he actually did something wrong. And so it's sort of going against the grain of the presumption of innocence when that is being floated around. Now we also see that there was a settlement that took place that is sort of implying that the city did something wrong before that's even been proven in a court of law. So it is, another thing that is just sort of framing this out as thinking beyond the sale. It's, we've already basically convicted him in the court of public opinion. And now the city council has done so as well by just acknowledging that they are responsible for harm, a lot of harm, $27 million worth of harm before it's even been discussed in court. Now, it may go through court. He may get convicted on all 3 charges, and the city was 100% right. But what happens if not? What happens if all of the evidence is presented and the city just paid out $27 million? I'm not saying that's not justified, but if they're going to pay the $27 million out on the basis that a city employee murdered somebody else and the court of law finds that he didn't actually murder somebody else, well, then the basis for the settlement of $27 million suddenly looks a lot less grounded, doesn't it? Farmer's daughter number 4 says, Robert, good evening. Do you think the $27 million settlement will affect the results of the trial? Thank you. You know, I would hope not, right? It shouldn't. The jurors at this point in time, at least the 7 who have been seated, they shouldn't hear anything about it. Do you believe that they're not going to hear anything about it? I don't. I really don't. I really don't know. I don't think it's a good thing. I don't think that this was something that should have happened before the verdict, but you can speculate all day long as to why they decided to do that. I don't know how it's going to go yet. You know, people are asking me about my predictions on this, and it's hard for me to comment on that because it is all speculative at this point. No evidence has been presented yet. We have hints of the evidence. We kind of know where the attorneys are going based on their lines of questioning, but we just haven't seen anything presented in court yet. So I would just be purely speculating. We have Hack Consulting says, hey, if they want to make race an issue, we may as well talk about it. We may dislike identity politics. However, we should find a way to be anti-identity politics. I am okay with the settlement. George did die. Now his family has a boost that surely George is happy for his family about. Less moral argument for the rioting. Yeah, I mean, look, I don't have any issues with the settlement either. I mean, I think it's something that it's a local issue. If the city council thinks that's best for their city and they entered into settlement negotiations with the Floyd family, they're free to do that. I just think that it might be a little bit premature because we haven't actually settled on the issue of causation about death or whether Derek Chauvin was ultimately responsible for it. Everything up until this point is just speculation. And understand that the presumption of innocence is still in effect in this country as far as I can tell. And so Derek Chauvin has not been convicted yet. He's still innocent. I know people don't think that, but this is the legal standard in this country. And I get on here and I rant and rave about it because it is that important. It's not something that we can just overlook because of the heinousness of the crime. Andrew Cuomo deserves it too. So does Ghislaine Maxwell. We're going to talk about her later. But everybody deserves it because that is the basis of our justice system. We start out not guilty. And so when you start to see dog piles happening around this country where everybody's just chomping at the bit to start declaring people guilty for whatever reason because they don't like the nature of the offense that's being alleged, that's not okay. They're entitled to their opinion, but they're not entitled to be jurors and they're not entitled to interfere with due process as it should exist to ensure that we have a fair and impartial trial. Good comment there, Hack Consulting. We got CA Java Bean says, if defense hadn't used peremptory challenge, would judge have dismissed for cause because of her obvious desire to be an activist juror? So I don't think so, actually. I think that judge would have allowed her to be on because of the fact that she said I could be fair and impartial. This judge maybe would have stricken her for cause, but maybe not. I mean, I've heard this judge a few times say, well, you know, they said they could be fair and impartial. And if the prosecutor would have argued about it, well, they might have kept her, but I think that she absolutely should have been stricken. That was a good peremptory move and good question, CA Java Bean. We got the doctor in the house. We have NY Renal MD says, does the juror have standing to allow her own lawyer to address the court? Why is this allowed? Is this typical? It's not typical, but yeah, I mean, if she's being summoned into court, she is a citizen that has the same due process to be represented by counsel in formal legal proceedings. So I don't think that it is customary. I think this woman was sort of a higher up position in a major healthcare nonprofit company. And so it sounds like she had the resources to bring somebody in. There was some questions about a conflict of interest or about being too close because of the business that she did with Keith Ellison in his office. And so, she was just exercising due caution. Attorneys will sometimes get involved in jury duty, but typically not. I mean, I've never been involved in anything like that myself. We have Ma Fox says, it's pretty clear to me this woman is pretty important if she has the money resources for an attorney to represent her as a juror. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Somebody who just, let me get my lawyer on the phone and he's there. And so, I'm not sure how you can read into that, but it does sound like she's in that upper echelon. We have News Now Wyoming said, I just did a video on the same article. I was very confused about the phrase, we will be judged forever for our reactions to this tragedy. Why? What are we being judged for? looting and burning, or a $27 million settlement? Is that what we are doing to settle it? Well, I don't know. I don't know specifically. I can't speak for that gentleman. We will be judged forever for our reactions to this tragedy. And, I don't know. I mean, everybody's using a lot of very, very colorful language right now. I mean, truthfully, as far as I can tell, we're doing in my opinion, a pretty good job, I think, of moving the needle on this issue. We've seen the Minneapolis City Council already make some major reforms. We see that George Floyd family just got $27 million. We are prosecuting the police officer who's responsible for it. And so I don't know what else there is to do on this particular case. Now, there is a lot that we can do to make sure that this stuff doesn't happen again. That conversation is not over. So maybe they're talking about that. And we've got a lot of runway left on this case. Farmer's Daughter says, do you think this settlement will set a future precedent for lawsuits? I do. I think that you always have to think about incentives when it comes to these types of things. And yeah, $27 million is a lot of money. That's going to create a lot of incentives. And I don't know what that means necessarily. Whether that causes people to want to file more lawsuits against the city, or whether the city suddenly starts sort of pulling back from certain types of enforcement because they don't want the liability of having to pay for certain types of claims like this. I don't know what the police budget there is in Minneapolis, but I would imagine that $27 million is a big chunk of that. And I'm not sure where that money's coming from, but somebody's got to pay for that, right? The city's got to deal with that, and that's not insignificant. And so the city might have some disincentives to do certain things that might result in something, right? Unknown consequences. We don't know, but the question here is about incentives, I think, and other people might be suing for bigger claims. Other people might be provoking certain interactions with law enforcement. It's just speculation. And law enforcement themselves may want to withdraw from certain types of enforcement so that they're not exposing themselves to a big settlement. This is all speculation. We don't know, but certainly I think it's a good question. We have Liberty or Death says, still haven't seen proof that Floyd was targeted or that Chauvin kept on his neck, if that's what killed him, was sure to racism. I can't stand Crump. He is one of Dr. Thomas Sowell calls a race hustler. Oh, does he? I didn't know that. He is going to get 1/3 of that 26 and 1/22 million. 26.5 million. Yeah, he's getting a nice payday. He's getting a very nice payday. That was a good case for him to settle. He settled. He's going to make a very significant chunk of money. We have Dr. Renal MD from New York says $27 million is just a start. There is an autonomous zone insurrection underway. That city is done. How does anyone return to life as usual? Who will invest in a business or home there? I fear the city is another casualty of the culture war. Democrats are angry about January 6th. Are they worried about destruction of a city? Well, I saw that not in Minneapolis yesterday. First of all, I did hear about that autonomous zone. I actually heard that somebody was killed in that autonomous zone very recently in the area surrounding Floyd's death. And there was also a video late last night that they set Portland's courthouse on fire. I saw literally the side of the building was on fire, and they went out and they extinguished it pretty quickly. But it is very interesting, isn't it? Right? January 6th was something that we are still getting beaten over the head about: extremism, white supremacy, and on and on and on. But almost no news about what's going on in Portland, and that is actually throwing Molotov cocktails and incendiaries at federal court buildings. So you can see what the double standard looks like in the media. Just get used to it. I don't think that's going anywhere. All right, so good questions on Derek Chauvin. Thank you for those. Those all came over from locals.com. We have a Watching the Watchers community over there. So if you want to get involved in the show, that's where to do it. All right.